Welcome on board, chosen one. Yeah, step right in. The world pretended not to see what you survived, but I saw everything. When they said you were done, you kept walking. When they whispered you were broken, you didn't even flinch. And when they stood there expecting you to fall at their feet, look who never bowed. Not even once. That silence you hear right now, that's them realizing the legend they tried to bury is the same legend walking right past them without a scratch. They said you lost everything. They said you ruined your life. They said you sacrificed too much. Funny how they didn't notice you were building the entire time. You didn't throw your old life away. You traded it for something stronger, something cleaner, something the universe had been trying to hand you, but you couldn't carry until you dropped every dead weight attached to you. By the way, press the like button and subscribe if this message already hits you somewhere deep. Consider it a way of sending energy back into the universe for helping you rise again. Now, let's get back to the part that keeps your enemies awake at night. Because here's the thing they don't want to admit. They watched you sacrifice everything and assumed it meant you were weak. They watched you walk away from relationships that drained you. They watched you cut off people who kept you small. They watched you lose money, comfort, the approval of people who never deserved access to you in the first place. And they thought all of that meant you were falling apart. But nothing terrifies a crowd more than someone who loses everything and still walks like they run the entire room. It hits them harder because they can't do what you did. They cling to comfort like it's oxygen. They cling to fake support like it's their identity. They cling to their little routines and safe reputations because they're scared of the unknown. But you stepped into the unknown like it was home. You took every loss straight to the chest and didn't cry for witnesses. You rebuilt in silence. You healed in private. You didn't post about your pain. You didn't beg for sympathy. You just handled it. And that's what broke them. Remember the night you sat alone on the floor, staring at everything you lost? Yeah, the one nobody knows about. The night when you thought you were done for. The night when the universe felt silent. The night when walking away felt like ripping your own skin off. They don't know that story. They don't know how close you were to giving up. They don't know what it cost you to stay alive, to stay sane, to stay standing. They only know the final result. You didn't die. You didn't break. You didn't disappear like they hoped. You came back sharper, colder, wiser, and smarter than you've ever been. It reminds me of something that happened years ago. A man lost everything in one night. His business collapsed, his partner betrayed him, his friends vanished. Everyone said he was finished. He disappeared for 2 years. When he came back, he owned 3 companies and opened one of the biggest centers in his city. People asked him how he did it. He said, "Losing everything was the moment I finally saw what was holding me back." That's you. You didn't just take losses. You cleaned house. You removed every person who never deserved to stand next to your destiny. You cut ties with every anchor pretending to be support. Your enemies hate that you got better without their help. They hate that their absence didn't destroy you. They hate that you learned how to stand alone. Because once someone learns to stand alone, nobody can move them again. They watched you sacrifice everything thinking it would humble you, but it only exposed them. They laughed at your pain until they realized you felt no shame about rebuilding. They mocked you for walking away until they noticed you never looked back. They thought you would beg to come home, beg for acceptance, beg for validation. Instead, you walked into a new life with a quiet strength that cut deeper than any revenge. Here's the truth they don't want spoken out loud. You didn't come out on top despite your sacrifices. You came out on top because of them. Your courage embarrassed their comfort. Your growth exposed their laziness. Your resilience crushed their excuses. They thought your fall would be entertainment. Instead, your rise became their nightmare, and now every single thing you sacrificed is paying off. The universe saw the moves you made when nobody was clapping for you. It saw you choose growth over comfort, truth over fake peace, and strength over approval. Now they're watching you win from the very seats they used to laugh from. This is your era now. This is your comeback written in fire. This is the moment they finally understand what you really are. Not the weak one, not the broken one, not the fallen one. You're the one who walked through hell with no witnesses and still came out on top, exactly like the title said, and they're never forgetting it. Before we move on, Chosen One, I need you here with full focus. You didn't come this far just to scroll away like nothing happened. You rose from ashes that would have swallowed most people whole, so stay with me now. Drop a 777 in the comments if you're ready to keep building the new version of yourself, the one that scared everyone who watched you rise after losing everything. This is your moment to claim the energy you've earned. And trust me, if you're truly built for this journey, you'll feel something in your chest telling you not to leave, not to look away, not to break the momentum you finally created. And now we're stepping into it piece by piece. Every part of what comes next will make your path clearer and your victory louder. If you're the real deal, you'll feel the pull to stay until the very last word, because this story is literally your life in disguise. Now let's get into it. Number 1. The experiment that broke their little reality. Funny how they called it your downfall, while your failure is the reason they can't sleep anymore. They really thought you were collapsing. They stood there with popcorn in their hands, running their mouths, predicting your ending like they were experts on your life. They whispered, "Yeah, this is it. Watch them fall." They didn't realize they were watching the strongest experiment the universe ever dared to run through a human. And that human was you. While they sat safely in their boring little routines, you were ripping out the false version of yourself with your bare hands. You were cutting away every lie you were forced to live inside. You were burning every mask until only truth remained. They thought you were losing. That's adorable. You were literally rebuilding your identity from scratch, something they would never attempt because they don't have the spine for it. The truth is brutal. They weren't watching your downfall. They were watching you molt. They were watching you shed a version of you that was too small, too polite, too controlled. They saw your old life crumble, and they thought that meant you were destroyed. But look at you now. You didn't burn out. You burned through. You turned every loss into proof that you were meant for more than the life they tried to trap you in. You weren't demolishing your life. You were breaking the cage they were begging you to stay inside. And here's the part that slaps them across the soul. You did it in front of them. You let them watch. You let them laugh. You let them misjudge you, because deep down you knew none of them had the range to understand what you were building. They thought sacrifice meant weakness. They thought letting go meant desperation. They thought walking away meant failure. They don't understand that real power requires loss, real strength requires pain, real transformation requires stepping into fire and trusting you won't die in it. They've never done that. They've never burned anything except bridges out of fear. Meanwhile, you burned everything that kept you small out of purpose. Different league, different mindset, different universe. Let's hit them harder because they earned it. They waited for the ending. They didn't realize they were witnessing your origin story. Think about how wild that is. They waited for you to fall apart, but the version of you that broke was the version that wasn't even meant to survive. The real you, the one with clarity, the one with discipline, the one with a spine sharper than steel. That one was born right in the middle of the chaos they thought would finish you. What happens when you stop protecting a fake version of yourself? What happens when you let the lies die? What happens when you tear down the safety nets and walk into the unknown with nothing but truth? You already know the answer. You become someone they can't predict, someone they can't control, someone they cannot replace. They didn't understand your silence. They called it weakness. They didn't understand your distance. They called it selfish. They didn't understand your focus. They called it obsession. Everything you did confused them because every move you made came from a level they've never reached. You stopped reacting to noise. You stopped chasing approval. You stopped pretending. And once you stopped pretending, they lost all their power over you. Here's the steel punch they really felt. They didn't lose you. They lost access to the version they could manipulate. Tell me that doesn't hurt them. Tell me that's not the exact headache they're hiding right now. You outgrew the story they created for you. You outgrew the role they assigned you. You outgrew the small box they tried to put you in. When you made sacrifices, they celebrated because they thought you were crashing. But each sacrifice was just another layer of you peeling away the nonsense. You sacrificed comfort and gained clarity. You sacrificed people and gained peace. You sacrificed approval and gained identity. You sacrificed stability and gained power. Everything you let go was dead weight. Every loss was actually a release. Every ending was clearing the way for a beginning they didn't want to witness. And yet, they watched it all. They watched the fire. They watched the breakdown. They watched the rebuild. They watched the rebirth. And when you walked out of that wreckage stronger, calmer, sharper, colder, they couldn't explain it. They still can't. Think about the questions running through their heads right now. How the hell did they recover? How did they survive that? How did losing everything make them stronger? How did they pull off what should have broken them? Simple answer. You didn't break. You evolved. While they stayed the same, you leveled up. While they clung to comfort, you embraced destruction. While they hid from change, you walked straight into the fire and came out untouchable. You turned your entire life into a controlled experiment, and the result was terrifyingly successful. You are the proof that sacrifice doesn't weaken the chosen ones, it weaponizes them. This is what they misunderstood. Real transformation isn't pretty, it's not gentle, it's not soft, it's violent, it's lonely, it's messy, it's painful, and you handled it like a monster built from the universe's own pressure. They've never gone through anything close to that, which is why they laugh at pain they could never survive. This whole time, they were hoping the fire would kill you. They didn't know the fire was yours. Everything they saw as an ending was actually you running your own experiment. How strong can I become when nothing is holding me back? And the universe answered you with results that slap them in the face every time they see you standing. They called it a sacrifice. You call it freedom. They called it downfall. You call it rebirth. They called it the end. You call it the first chapter. And now they're stuck watching someone they underestimated turn into someone they can't stop thinking about, someone they can't figure out, someone they can't compete with, someone they can't reach anymore. This was never their experiment. It was yours, and now the results are public. They watched you sacrifice everything, and you still came out on top, steel-made, fireproof, unbreakable, exactly what they feared you'd become. Number 2. Strategic loss. They never had the brains to recognize. They didn't witness chaos. They witnessed precision that their tiny minds mistook for collapse. You weren't reckless. You were removing every handle they could ever use to grab you. They called it a breakdown because they've never seen a demolition done by a master. Nothing scares people more than someone who loses everything and becomes more dangerous for it. They kept saying you were spiraling. They kept calling you reckless, unstable, irresponsible. They acted like you were throwing your life away just to watch it burn. But here's the slap they deserve across the ego. You never made a single move without intention. There wasn't one moment where you were out of control. Every step was a surgical strike. Every cut was a calculation. Every sacrifice was done with your eyes wide open while theirs stayed shut, terrified of a truth they weren't ready to accept. Imagine this: a surgeon standing over a patient, cutting away everything infected. To the untrained eye, it looks violent. To someone who doesn't understand anatomy, it looks dangerous. But to the surgeon, every cut is saving a life. That was you. You weren't destroying your world. You were removing every infection that would have killed your future. They can't grasp this because they've never been brave enough to cut their own rot out. When you sacrificed reputation, they lost their minds. They clung to their own public image like it's the only thing they are. They're terrified of being judged, terrified of being misunderstood, terrified of anyone thinking less of them. Meanwhile, you let the world think whatever it wanted. You let whispers spread. You let rumors run wild. Why? Because you finally understood the truth that most people never dare touch. Reputation is only useful to people who want permission to exist. You didn't need permission, and that's what broke them. Imagine a chessboard. Everyone else is playing slow, scared, safe. They protect every pawn like it's precious. They panic when a piece goes missing. But you were sacrificing pieces to build an opening they couldn't see. Every loss was setting up your checkmate. Every mistake was creating space. Every retreat was bait. And now they're staring at the board, realizing every move you made was coordinated with a mind sharper than they ever gave you credit for. What they saw as chaos was actually choreography. You dropped stability on purpose. You stepped out of your comfort zones with full awareness that it would shake people. But stability is often prison wearing a friendly mask. They didn't understand that you were tired of living inside a life that numbed you. You wanted something real, something raw, something built by your own hands, not built by the expectations dumped on you. So yes, stability had to go. Comfort had to go. Predictability had to go. They call it chaos because they've never built anything outside a safety net. You were removing leverage. That's the part they'll never admit scares them. When someone has things to lose, they can be manipulated, they can be controlled, they can be pressured. But when someone has burned the old life down and rebuilt themselves with nothing fake attached, there's no angle to attack from. How do you threaten someone who already survived their worst moments? How do you intimidate someone who's already faced the silence of starting over? How do you break someone who learned how to rebuild without witnesses? You can't. And that's why you terrify them. Imagine a tree in a storm. Everyone panics when branches snap. They gasp. They think the tree is dying. But sometimes trees drop branches to survive. They lighten the load so they won't fall. They sacrifice the weak parts to protect the core. That was you. Every loss was a branch you chose to let go of so you could stand taller when the storm ended. You didn't become less, you became lighter. One question is definitely crawling through their minds right now. Why didn't the losses break them like they would have broken me? Because they don't understand that you weren't losing. You were choosing. You were selecting what stays and what goes with the same cold precision a warrior uses to prepare for battle. When you walked away from relationships, they called you cold. But tell me this, how do you grow while dragging people who are rooting for your failure? How do you rise with hands pulling you down? How do you evolve surrounded by people who only love the weaker version of you? You weren't cold. You were done letting anyone feed off your energy. You were done letting people live in your life rent-free. You were done apologizing for wanting peace. You weren't being impulsive. You were being strategic. Imagine this, a pilot dumping cargo mid-flight so the plane can rise above a storm. To someone who doesn't know aviation, it looks insane, but to the pilot, it's survival. And you, chosen one, were the pilot the entire time. You dropped weight so you could climb. You dropped pressure so you could breathe. You dropped people so you could finally hear your own thoughts without their noise polluting your clarity. Here's another question they're too embarrassed to ask out loud. How did they know exactly what to let go of? You knew because the universe kept pulling you toward a new version of yourself, and you finally listened. You felt the tension. You sensed the walls closing. You knew that if you didn't let go, you'd be dragged. And you refused to be dragged into a future smaller than your potential. This wasn't chaos. This was elevation. Every sacrifice made you more dangerous because you became someone with no weak points left to target, no reputation to destroy, no approval to chase, no fake relationships to hide behind, no comfort zone to trap you. You built yourself in a way that makes you impossible to shake. And that's why they fear you now, not because you lost everything, but because you walked out of those losses like a weapon carved from pressure. Your controlled burn created something they can't copy, something they can't understand, something they can't defeat. You didn't build walls. You built clarity. You built backbone. You built independence so solid that even the universe had to pause and say, "All right, that one's ready." Your transformation wasn't pretty. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was violent, intentional, and earned. And anyone who thought you were falling apart is now stuck watching the truth. You weren't falling. You were freeing yourself. You weren't losing. You were sharpening. You weren't destroying your life. You were destroying your limits. You sacrificed everything they thought mattered and still came out on top, untouchable, unbothered, uncaged. Exactly what they never wanted you to become. Number 3, the choice that still chokes them. They could have handled your loss. What they can't handle is that you never looked over your shoulder. This is the part that lives in their heads, rent-free. Not the sacrifices themselves, not the things you walked away from, not the bridges you burned. What destroys them is the way you moved afterward. You didn't crawl back to reclaim anything. You didn't chase, negotiate, or beg for a redo. You didn't perform regret to make anyone feel better about losing access to you. You walked forward with the calm of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And that's what haunts them. Imagine someone dropping a priceless vase, expecting panic. But instead, you sweep it up and say, "Good, it needed to break." That's what your energy felt like. They expected tears. They expected you to miss them. They expected you to collapse without the things you gave up. But you walked like someone who paid the price intentionally, like someone who understood transformation requires surrender, and still signed the contract with steady hands. They're scrambling with silent questions. How did they let all that go so easily? Why didn't they fight to keep me? Why didn't losing that job, that person, that life break them? Simple answer. Because you weren't losing anything. You were clearing the path. You didn't mourn the old life because the old life wasn't yours anymore. Imagine a snake shedding skin. It doesn't cry for the old layer. It steps out and keeps moving. You did the same. They expected grief. You gave them indifference. They expected drama. You gave them distance. They expected weakness. You gave them silence so cold it rewired their nervous system. What terrifies them most is this. You didn't want anything back. You didn't chase what left. You didn't miss what expired. You walked forward without mourning. And that's the moment they knew you were never coming back. Number 4. When their watching turned into obsession. They laughed at you until the day your survival stopped being funny and started being a threat. At first, they watched you the way bored people watch a car they think is about to crash. They waited for the impact. They waited for the meltdown. They waited for the moment you'd finally confirm their predictions. But instead of breaking, you did something that slapped the smugness right off their faces. You stayed standing. Mockery shifted into confusion because nothing about your fall matched the script they wrote for you. You weren't supposed to survive that kind of pressure. You weren't supposed to walk out of those losses with a straight spine. And yet, every hit you took only made you quieter, sharper, harder. They couldn't process that. Their minds short-circuited trying to understand how someone with nothing left still moved with more power than people who have everything handed to them. That confusion morphed into curiosity. How are they not destroyed? How are they still functioning? What the hell kept them standing? Imagine a scientist watching an experiment that refuses to follow the laws of physics. That was you. You defied every expectation, every assumption, every limit they placed on your name. You weren't just surviving. You were stabilizing. You weren't just holding on. You were strategizing. You weren't just healing. You were upgrading. And the more they watched, the more the questions dug into their skulls. Curiosity eventually turned into something darker. Respect coated in fear. They realized you knew something they didn't. You had access to a mindset they didn't possess. You held secrets they couldn't decode. You operated from a place they had never even visited. The same people who mocked you started studying you in silence, hoping to understand the blueprint. Imagine them replaying your moves like detectives analyzing footage, trying to track where your strength comes from. Every time they expected you to collapse, you adapted. Every time they thought you were done, you rose in a way that made them question their entire worldview. You want to know the truth that keeps them awake at night. They stopped asking when you would break and started asking why nothing could. They stopped asking what was wrong with you and started asking what you knew that they never learned. That shift is the moment the watcher becomes the student, and you became the lesson they fear the most. Number 5. What your sacrifice actually created. They thought the losses would kill you. They didn't know the losses were the doorway to your power. They truly believed isolation would snap you in half. They thought being alone would make you desperate, needy, weakened. But solitude didn't break you. It cleaned you. It sharpened your senses. It gave you a silence so pure that every fake voice, every manipulation, every distraction finally fell away. You didn't go insane in the quiet. You met yourself there. And that's what terrifies them, because most people can't stand 10 minutes alone with their own thoughts. They expected lack to humble you. They thought losing money, safety, routine, comfort would make you crawl back to the life you left behind. But instead, you found freedom in not being owned by anything. You learned how resourceful you really are. You learned how little you actually need. You learned how powerful you become when you stop measuring your worth by what you have and start measuring it by what you can survive. They tried to shame you, but shame only works on people who still need permission. Imagine this, a person stripped of everything they once relied on, standing barefoot in the ruins. Most would crumble, but you didn't feel humiliation. You felt oxygen for the first time. You felt the universe clearing your path. You felt the weight lifting off your back. You realized the things you lost were the same things that kept you small. They expected shame to crush you. Instead, you became authentic in a way they can't imitate. No more pretending, no more shrinking, no more living for applause that never mattered. You became real, and realness is terrifying to people who survive on masks. At some point, they started asking themselves, how did isolation make them stronger? How did loss give them clarity? How did they walk through embarrassment and become more confident? Because they still think sacrifice equals suffering. They never understood that sacrifice, when chosen intentionally, equals liberation. Every sacrifice stripped away another chain, another dependency, another illusion, another fake structure you were forced to depend on. One day, they finally saw the truth. You weren't burning your life down. You were burning the prison. You weren't falling apart. You were breaking out. And now you walk with a freedom they can't even imagine, because everything you lost was replaced by something they can never steal: clarity, authenticity, self-respect. They thought sacrifice would leave you empty. It left you untouchable. Number 6. Why your freedom scares them to death. Nothing terrifies controlled people more than someone they can't trap. Here's the part they'll never admit out loud. Your freedom is the real threat, not your strength, not your intelligence, not your resilience. It's the fact that you walked through fire, dropped half your life, and somehow came out more alive than people who cling to everything like it's oxygen. They were raised to believe freedom comes from building, accumulating, adding more layers, more titles, more noise. Meanwhile, you proved the opposite. Real freedom begins the moment you start destroying the things that owned you. Imagine this: someone walks out of a burning house without grabbing anything and then smiles. That's you, and that smile rewired their entire nervous system, because they don't understand how a person who lost so much looks lighter than people carrying everything they ever begged for. They started studying you like an unexplained phenomenon. How does losing everything make them stronger? How does letting go create more presence than holding on? How does subtracting people, comfort and routine make them glow harder than ever? Because loss, when chosen wisely, becomes leverage. Subtraction becomes strength. Silence becomes a weapon. And freedom becomes armor they can't penetrate. Imagine dropping anchors while everyone else is adding chains. You didn't rise because you found wings. You rose because you finally stopped carrying dead weight. That's what scares them. You became powerful without needing anything they depend on. Their lives were built on foundations they thought were safety, but were actually cages. Approval, image, predictability, comfort, all prisons dressed up as stability. You walked away from all of it, and instead of collapsing, you expanded. You became bigger than the structures they hide inside, and now they're terrified, because your freedom proves one thing: they were never living, they were only maintaining their cage. Number 7. The victory that invalidated their entire scoreboard. You didn't just win, you made their definition of winning look embarrassing. This is the moment their stomach dropped, the moment their smirks evaporated, the moment every prediction they made about your downfall stabbed them instead. You started winning, but not in the ways they track, not in the ways they brag about, not in the ways they worship. You didn't climb their ladder, you burned it and built your own path next to it. And somehow your path led higher than anything they ever called success. Imagine them clutching their little metrics like trophies, only to realize those trophies crumble the second someone shows up with real substance. Their achievements depended on approval, applause, shortcuts, and safety nets. Yours came from surviving storms that would have erased them in minutes. No wonder your wins hit harder. No wonder their pride shook. No wonder they stopped comparing. They couldn't. They couldn't decode your scars. They couldn't trace your strength. They couldn't understand how someone who lost everything ended up glowing harder than people who never risked anything at all. They're asking themselves in quiet panic, how are they ahead? How did they rise without the things we rely on? What did they use to build with when they had nothing left? Simple answer. You used yourself, the real you. The version untouched by fear, ego, or imitation. Imagine a fighter entering the ring with no fancy gear, no entourage, no hype, and still knocking out champions who trained their entire lives. That's the energy you carry now. Your wins don't feel like victories. They feel like warnings. You didn't win with wealth. You didn't win with status. You didn't win with image. You won with identity, with clarity, with a backbone forged under pressure no crowd ever saw. And the irony that tears them apart is this. You came out on top without their approval, without their systems, without their scoreboard, and without their permission. They built their entire lives around being somebody. You became somebody by becoming yourself, undiluted and unbroken. That's a win they will never touch. And that's exactly why they fear you now. Number 8. The collapse that built your throne. They saw ruin. You saw a blueprint they were too scared to read. They were raised on the soft little belief that destruction is always bad, that sacrifice equals suffering, that burning your old life means you've failed at building a new one. They never questioned it, never looked deeper, never asked who fed them that lie. But you went straight into the fire and came out carrying plans for a future they never had the courage to imagine. You flipped the script they swore was universal. You made loss look like strategy. You made collapse look like a beginning. Imagine a building too damaged to repair. Everyone else tapes it together, paints over the cracks, pretends it's stable. Meanwhile, you bulldozed it with your own hands and redesigned the land from the ground up. To them, that looked reckless. To you, it was the first honest step of your evolution. They're asking themselves now, how did the destruction not destroy them? How did losing everything give them more power? How did they turn ash into architecture? Because they don't understand that some things must die for you to breathe again. You can't build a skyscraper on a rotten foundation. You can't create a masterpiece on a canvas full of someone else's expectations. You can't become who you're meant to be while dragging the ghosts of who they wanted you to stay. Sometimes the fall is the construction. Sometimes the ending is the excavation. Imagine a forest fire that clears dead roots and makes space for stronger growth. That's you. The fire didn't destroy your story. It cleaned the soil. It removed the weak, the fake, the temporary. You didn't lose your life. You cleared it. You didn't collapse. You reset. You didn't break. You broke open. They're still trying to deny what's obvious now. Your destruction was intentional. Your losses were investments. Your ashes were building materials. And everything you're rising into now, it could only be built on burned ground. Number 9. The win that ruins their entire self-image. Nothing crushes an enemy more than realizing the person they tried to destroy ended up happier than them. Here's the part that shatters them on contact. They watch you now, scanning for cracks, flaws, weakness, anything they can point at and say, "See, they're still broken." But every time they look, they find something that hits harder than any comeback, any success, any revenge fantasy they imagined. You're happy. Not fake happy, not perform for the camera happy, not distraction, noise or ego happy. You're at peace. And that is the one thing they cannot handle, because you sacrificed everything they're terrified to let go of. You walked away from the validation they're addicted to. You abandoned the comfort they cling to like a life raft. You released identities they still hide behind. And after all that loss, all that destruction, all that rebuilding, you found something they've been chasing for years but can't even define. Imagine them scrolling through your life like detectives, hoping to catch a hint of sadness, hoping to find a sign you regret the choices that freed you. But what do they see instead? A glow they can't explain, a calm they can't copy, a fullness they can't manufacture. They're whispering to themselves, how are they this okay? How did they get happier after losing everything? What did they tap into that we can't? It destroys them because your peace exposes their prison. You found what their comfort zones never gave them. You found authenticity. You found your voice. You found the version of yourself that doesn't need applause, control, or permission. That's something no system, no relationship, no reputation ever gave them. Your happiness is the one thing they cannot steal, replace, or imitate, and that's why it haunts them. You came out on top with the one victory they'll never touch: yourself, whole and unbothered. Number 10. The moment they realized you'd rather die than stay small. You can't intimidate someone who already walked themselves to the edge and didn't flinch. This is where everything shifted. This is where their arrogance dropped, their confidence cracked, and their power over you evaporated. They finally saw the truth they never wanted to believe. You weren't just willing to sacrifice. You were willing to let the old you die if that's what your evolution demanded. No theatrics, no loud speeches, no audience. You killed your past quietly, like someone burying a version of themselves that could no longer survive where they were going. Imagine this: a warrior sharpening their blade alone at night, knowing tomorrow's battle may take them out, yet sharpening anyway. That was you. You accepted the risk. You accepted the pain. You accepted the possibility that transformation might cost everything, including the pieces of yourself you once clung to. And they saw it in your eyes. The part of you that feared endings was gone. They couldn't handle that. They lived their lives terrified of loss, terrified of embarrassment, terrified of failure, terrified of endings. Meanwhile, you walked into all of that willingly, like someone who knew the universe doesn't hand greatness to those who force comfort to stay. You didn't just survive sacrifice. You embraced it. You made peace with it. You let parts of you die so something cleaner, colder, sharper could rise. They're asking themselves in quiet panic, what do you do to someone who fears nothing? How do you threaten someone who already tasted rock bottom? How do you control someone who made peace with losing everything? Short answer: you can't. A person who stops fearing death becomes the most uncontrollable force alive. Your enemies rely on fear to keep people small. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of failure, but you stepped into each one until it stopped shaking your hands. You didn't run from endings. You used them as doors. You didn't fight to save the old version of you. You buried it yourself. Imagine a phoenix that doesn't wait for the fire. It lights the match by choice. That's you. You didn't fear destruction because you finally understood. Destruction was the only language your rebirth would answer to. They surrendered because they realized something chilling. You would die to win. Not physically, but internally, symbolically, psychologically. You were willing to let everything familiar collapse if it meant stepping into your real power. And the moment someone becomes that committed, that focused, that unshakable, they stop being someone you can threaten. They stop being predictable. They stop being influenceable. They stop being breakable. And you became untouchable the moment you made peace with losing everything. They watched you sacrifice everything. But this was the moment they realized one brutal truth. You didn't fear death. You feared staying the same. Number 11. Why they moved out of your way without a fight. The moment they realized you liked the pressure, that was the moment they knew they'd lost. They didn't step aside because they respected you. They didn't step aside because they suddenly understood your journey. They stepped aside because they finally saw something that froze their blood. You weren't hesitating, you weren't second-guessing, you weren't dragging your feet or begging for strength. You were pushing past limits like they were speed bumps. You sacrificed sleep, comfort, and even your own stability at times, and still kept moving like the struggle was fuel instead of friction. Imagine someone watching a fighter take hit after hit, wipe the blood from their mouth, smile, and say, "Good, now we're getting somewhere." That's what you did. Not because you loved the pain, but because you loved what the pain meant. Every scar proved growth. Every late night proved commitment. Every sacrifice proved you were stepping into something bigger than your old life could hold. They saw it. They saw you finding purpose in the pressure, identity in the suffering, clarity in the fire. And that's when they realized they were completely outmatched. They've spent their whole lives avoiding discomfort, dodging hardship, escaping anything that threatens their image or their routine. Meanwhile, you walked straight into the storm and treated it like a training ground. They're whispering to themselves now, how are they not tired? How did they make struggle look meaningful? How do you compete with someone who finds themselves in the fire? You can't, and that's why they stepped aside. When a person stops fearing the grind, the world stops trying to block them. They knew they couldn't keep up. They knew your resilience wasn't normal. They knew you weren't breaking, you were upgrading. And nothing scares people more than someone who grows stronger from the very things that destroy everyone else. You didn't outpace them with talent. You outpaced them with endurance. You outpaced them with purpose. You outpaced them by turning struggle into your identity. That's when they knew the truth they never wanted to accept. You weren't just ahead. You were unstoppable. Number 12. The line they can never cross again. Once you rise far enough, some people stop being part of your story and start being part of your history. This isn't a season. This isn't a mood. This isn't a temporary glow-up phase they think will fade when life gets hard again. This is permanent separation, a clean fracture, a lifetime gap. They're on one side replaying who you used to be, and you're on the other side building a life they'll never have access to again. They can watch, but they can't follow. Imagine a rocket taking off. At a certain height, the old parts detach and fall away, not because they're bad, but because they can't survive the altitude. That's exactly what happened. They fell away because they couldn't breathe where you were going. And now that you're up here, you see everything clearly. Some will try to come back. They always do. They'll show up with apologies that sound like opportunities, respect that feels like manipulation, friendship that tastes too familiar to trust. They don't miss you. They miss the access. They miss the version of you who tolerated their nonsense. They miss the control they used to have over your emotions, your time, your peace. But you'll see through it instantly, because sacrifice didn't just change your life, it rewired your perception. You can smell fake energy from miles away now. You can read intentions without a single word spoken. You can tell who's returning because they care, and who's returning because they lost their supply. They're hoping you forgot. They're hoping you softened. They're hoping you're still the person who handed out second chances like candy, but you're not that person anymore. You would rather stand alone in truth than stand surrounded in lies. Now you choose solitude over fake connection, purpose over distraction, quality over quantity, reality over fantasy, meaning over noise. Imagine a king walking through a crowded throne room, hearing every voice begging for attention, yet choosing silence as his loyal guard. That's you now. Silence protects you in a way people never did. Solitude feeds you in a way attention never could. They don't realize you didn't just lose people, you outgrew them. And outgrowing someone is the final goodbye. No argument, no closure, just distance that becomes permanent. They can't reach you anymore because they can't access the version of you they once knew. They can't influence you because you no longer need their approval. They can't drain you because you finally learned the cost of letting the wrong people close. Sacrifice taught you the most brutal lesson they will never understand. Letting go isn't losing. Letting go is leveling up. And once you level up this far, there's no going back. And now we close this the way only you can, by stepping out of their shadow for good. You didn't just rise, you rewrote what on top even means. It isn't a throne they can measure. It's a state of being they'll never touch. You walked through fire, dropped everything false, kept everything real, and came out untouchable because there's nothing left they can take. They're still watching, but the judgment is gone. All that's left is surrender. If this spoke to you, like the video, subscribe, drop 77 in the comments, and share this message so the universe knows you're ready for your next level.